I mean, looking at this list, there's China in this list.
There's China, yes.
And this is the country we understand in some years to come, they'll be the biggest economy in the world.
Yes, we expect so.
Yet they're listed as being extremely poor.
Oh, yes.
I was supposed to take some sort of solace
Because
in this
at
one
times
because
we do not know that it is possible for a country to be rich and for its people to be extremely poor. It's perfectly possible.
So that's the key.
That's the key. Because those who control the resources of the state are just a few. Let me give you an instance in terms of Nigeria, for example. In the public sector of Nigeria, if you even had the civil servants in Nigeria, put all of them together, there are less than 3 million people. Those people in the political sector in Nigeria, for example, 109 persons in the Senate, 360 in the House of Reps, and they put all the ministers, Minister Honda, Minister Pechin at the back of Minister in. If you put all of them together, there are less than 3 million people in a population of 160 million. Even if these 3 million people were to get good jobs, what of the remainder 157 million? In Lagos State, for example, less than 70,000 people are employed by the government in the civil service. Less than 70,000 in a city or in a state that has about 15 million inhabitants. So what is 70,000? What is 70,000? So we have a situation in our hands that government must take deliberate, firm, direct decision to create jobs. And how can it do it? Agriculture.
Should they be the ones creating jobs?
Exactly. We talked about private sector coming in to help in the creation of jobs.
The private sector will do that, will create jobs if the infrastructure is there.
So they provide the enabling environment.
Yes, the government must provide the template, must provide the foundations, the infrastructure foundations. You can't create jobs without infrastructure. You can't create jobs, for example, without electricity. The town planner, or what you call the hairdresser, for example, the welder, the technician, the electrical technician, all of them will need the electricity. Okay. If they go creating the jobs directly by themselves, will they also create the facilities by which the jobs have to be
Dr. Ogunyemi, this will, let's take this back to the issue of budgeting. Okay. I mean, over the years we've had budgets that have been passed, budgets of transformation, yes. Budgets of, I mean, they're all christened differently.
Oh yes.
How is it that these budgets are not transformed? are not translated to creating the infrastructure?
Because there is a disconnect between the public sector and the private person. There's a disconnect. That disconnection factors into its calculus only those that are employed directly by the government. For example, in this year's budget, 70% of the money that government has voted in its expenditure program will go into payment of salaries, overheads for those that are indirectly involved with government. Even when you attach 10 persons to every person employed by government, it will still be less. The people that are covered by government will still be less than 15 million people. So the real sector of the economy needs to be woken up. Agriculture, for example. NISA, Nigerian Institute for Social and Economic Research, already has the template. It's there in the archives. Or the departments of economics in our universities. They have done it, they have suggested. For example, if you employ, you will need 16 million youth from Julius Baja in Lagos to Gurumaraji village in Ibadan, in Oyo State. Within that distance, you need 60 million youth to plant oil palm, for example. Oil palm. They will be employed, 16 million, in that kind of distance. Not to talk of the distance between Makoji and Aliede.
Is it planting?
Yes,
just to plant?
Just to plant.
Not the harvest?
Not to just
Not
harvest,
the processing?
Just planting. You will employ 16 million persons. 16 million.
Mechanized.
Some people will argue that, it would seem that all cannot be done at once. That what we suffer currently is owing to years of neglect. We have been through a lot as a country, and our democracy, fledgling as it is, it seems to be addressing some of these issues currently. You talked about agriculture. Mm-hmm. We've been hearing the right rhetoric from the Minister of Agriculture. It would seem that something is eventually being done from what we hear. It might not be at the level that we want it to be, but it would seem that we're making some progress.
I share that sentiment, madam, with you. But you see, we are in an emergency. A situation of paralysis needs a shock therapy to bring it to normalcy. See, when you have such a situation where just 4,000 persons are required by the Nigerian Immigration Service, for example, mm-hmm. and 520,000 persons applied, that's more than the population of Cape Verde Island. Cape Verde Island is still around 80,000. And 500,000 people have 1 million people.
Not all of them jobless.
Oh, well, of course, but most of them jobless. And you know, when you talk of governance, you talk of the most, you talk of the population, you talk of those that are affected mostly, not those that are actually at the margins. So we are in an emergency. That government needs to declare an emergency situation under the issue of jobs and the creation of jobs.
What do you think?
That's what we should do.
What role do you think population explosion also plays in this? Because some people also say that we have grown at an exponential rate, and it was saying that the infrastructure, we weren't thinking along the lines of infrastructure and also education.
I don't agree with you. Nigeria, we are not overpopulated. Surely not overpopulated. 834,000 square kilometers. That's about 4 times Great Britain in size. And most of our lands very arable. 68% of Nigeria's land arable. And most of our people still live in the rural areas. So where's the overpopulation? These are just the things that maybe the World Bank and the IMF says to us.
No, but let's look at what is happening in the cities. Yes. You cannot deny that there is a rural-urban migration.
Of course,
and that that continues on a daily basis and is beginning to stress infrastructure in the cities. Yeah. So how do we also tackle that? How do we marry that with education? And then you also have a situation whereby poverty is also affected by how families. You have a large family, you don't have a job, or sometimes you have a job that can hardly take care of a large family. How do we also marry? Are these not issues related to education?
No, of course, but we can keep the jobless man, or we can keep those people migrating to the urban centers. We can keep them at the local level. We can put them there by creating the facilities by which they will develop. But we have just not done that. See, we have a situation in our hands. A situation that we must sit down and reflect, take multi-partisan approach to this issue, and stop politicking about the youth. If we are going to have the real solutions to solving the issues of poverty, it must come at the level of deliberate effort of government to just employ the youth.
How do you think about that politicking, though? Could you shed some light on that?
Of course. Let's go historical. During the time Germany had this same problem in the 1920s and 1930s. And Hitler did one thing. He employed all employable youth into the army, and he mobilized them to war. That may be a negative way, of course, of solving an unemployment problem. But we have so many wars we can fight now. We can fight wars of environmental degradation. How about employing about 1.6 million street sweepers, for example, regardless of their qualification? How about employ some people who, for example, who are going to help us to clear the drains? 16 million of them.
Now be increasing the overhead.
Oh, of course, if you increase the overhead for the purposes of creating more jobs. Because the negative effect of having people not just doing anything is greater than the negative effect of overblowing the recurrent expenditure side. It's high time we did something. It's because it's an emergency.
But you see, what though? The argument will now be, as we speak, we're still quarreling over the fact that the recurrent expenditure in our budget is over or higher than the capital expenditure, and employing these people now would increase that recurrent again.
Okay.
So we're still back to no funds to carry out capital projects, and then the infrastructure suffers.
Oh, we are going to involve those people, for example, if government accepts that suggestion, involve them in things that will create wealth, and not in things that will just be attached to consumption. So agriculture, for example, if you employ 60 million people in agriculture, how will that unnecessarily create problems for our budgeting system? In 6, 7, 8 years' time, the products that they have succeeded in producing, of course, will negative.
Do you agree with this comment? Henry says, if we practice true and fiscal federalism, and all states finding ways to raise resources, they will think of agriculture.
Of course, they will think. See, I have said this earlier. I said, what the problem we have in our hands is the federal government that wants to do everything, but has no capacity to do it. See, we have a situation in which we are not practicing true federalism. And true federalism, for example, will require a situation in which the states can independently generate their revenues and pay some taxes to the center. This was also playing in Nigeria between 1954 and 1965. Don't forget, we were brought into this system by the long years of military rule that did nothing for Nigerian federalism. So if we return to a competitive federalism, a situation in which a state shall be to your tents and goes for us all, you will see that the states and the initiative that will come from them will solve the unemployment problems. We have a situation in which, in our hands, for example, the federal government wants to tell you how much you should levy on poll tax. Personal income tax, for example, is a federal law. It's not a state law, even though states benefit from the tax. And they do some retaining. I mean, they retain some part of the tax before they remit to the FFRS. But the truth is that it is a federal law. So the state cannot tinker with the tax base. They can tinker with the tax base. Why, for example, should the federal government be in charge of personal income tax? Why? There's no justification for it in the federal system. Even England, that's a unitary state, is trying as much as possible to devolve power to Scotland, to Wales, and to Northern Ireland, to the extent that Scotland now has its own parliament.